A warm summer evening had descended upon the suburbs, bathing the Carter residence in a soft golden light. The smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the air, while the gentle rustling of leaves could be heard in the distance. Dan Carter, a 40-year-old financial analyst, sat on the spacious terrace of his large home. He took a satisfying sip of cool whiskey as he surveyed the well-manicured garden, which symbolized his financial success and stability. Anna Roberts, his wife, joined him with a glass of wine. At 35, she looked younger than her years, thanks to a strict diet and fitness regime she'd adopted after leaving her career as an architect. Tonight, Anna was wearing a light dress that perfectly highlighted her slender figure. "Isn't it wonderful to just relax here after a long day?" Dan asked with a smile, looking at her. Anna nodded, but her smile was faint. There was no joy in her eyes. To Dan, life seemed perfectly balanced: a successful career, a beautiful wife, and a dream home. But for Anna, this life felt dull. Despite the luxury they could afford, she felt an emptiness. Their intimate life was still enjoyable for Dan, but for Anna, it had long ceased to bring the pleasure it once did. Their experiment with an open relationship, which started a year ago, had been an attempt to reignite passion. But for Anna, it was only a temporary solution, one that hadn't satisfied her craving for real emotions and thrills. In recent months, the parties had become infrequent, and Anna had started losing interest in the experiment. Dan, content with his life, was oblivious to what was happening inside his wife. He was confident that everything was going well, but Anna was increasingly preoccupied with the thought that her life had become a monotonous cycle of days devoid of real inspiration. "We haven't been to those parties in a while," Anna suddenly said, breaking the silence. Dan turned to her, frowning slightly. "Are you talking about that? I thought you weren't all that interested anymore. You seemed bored the last few times." Anna sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They have become boring, but I don't think it's the parties. Maybe it's just that the people we spent time with couldn't give me something real. I recently heard about another club, something completely new." "Oh, really?" Dan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unexpected turn. "What kind of club?" "It's called Banana," Anna replied with a slight smile, closing her eyes for a moment. "It's not just couples. There are single guys and girls, all very different, with other rules. It's more than what we've tried before." Dan chuckled, finding the name absurd. "Banana? Are you serious?" "Yes," Anna continued confidently. "They say it's the most exciting thing you can experience. Maybe we should go just once and see what it's like." Dan hesitated. Despite the ridiculous name, he understood that his wife was looking for something new. Her interest was clear, but he had always been cautious about new ventures, especially such unconventional ones. "We don't have to do anything," Anna added, sensing his hesitation. "We can just look, just to shake things up a bit." Dan sighed. He wasn't sure about this idea, but he couldn't ignore her desire. Maybe this was what their relationship needed. "All right," he finally said. "We can give it a try, but I'm not promising anything." Anna smiled wider than she had all evening. She felt like this was a step closer to what she really needed. A few days after their conversation, Dan and Anna prepared for their first visit to the Banana Club. For Anna, the preparation was part of the thrill. She chose her most seductive dress with a deep neckline and high heels, got her hair done, and applied a new perfume. To her, this evening meant more than just a night out. It was a chance to reclaim the feelings of freedom and control she had lost. Dan, on the other hand, felt tense. Although he was used to making well-calculated decisions as a financial analyst, tonight everything felt uncertain. The club's name still seemed ridiculous to him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something strange. When they arrived, they were greeted by a large modern house surrounded by a perfectly landscaped yard, illuminated by fountains and torches. The party at the Banana Club was nothing like their previous gatherings. The atmosphere was open and intriguing. At the entrance, they were greeted by the club's hostess, a woman in her 40s with flawless makeup. "Do I look okay?" Anna asked, turning to her husband. "You look stunning," Dan said honestly. He thought Anna had truly put in the effort to prepare for the evening. Just looking at her, Dan felt a slight thrill of excitement. His thoughts were interrupted when the door opened. Standing there was a beautiful woman in her 40s, a tall brunette impeccably dressed. "Hello," she said with a smile. "You must be Anna and Dan. Please, come in. I'm Allison Reed." The lighting in the hall was soft and dim, with candles adding an intimate glow. From the adjacent room, the sound of quiet conversations and muted music could be heard. "Anna," Allison continued, tilting her head slightly, "you're just as beautiful as Jessica said. I think you'll be a wonderful addition to our little group." Dan noticed that the hostess was addressing only his wife, ignoring him completely. It irritated him slightly, but he tried not to show it. "Here's your necklace and key," Allison said, handing Anna a circular necklace with a lock and a plastic bracelet with a key, which Anna slipped onto her wrist. "Come with me. I'll show you the bar. Jessica is already here, waiting to meet you." "Great," Anna said as she and Dan followed Allison into a large, dark, wood-paneled room. It was a luxurious library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace. At one end of the room was a bar. Dan noticed that the bartender, a man in his 40s, wore a necklace similar to Anna's. This puzzled him. Allison caught his curious look. "He wears the collar to serve everyone in the circle, and he also has other duties during the evening," she explained calmly. "I see," Dan replied shortly. In front of the bartender stood a young man and an attractive blonde woman in her 40s. "Your champagne, madam," said the bartender, placing glasses of sparkling wine before them. "And your scotch, sir." Dan thought the bartender was exceptionally polite. He and Anna ordered white wine, which was poured and served with flawless efficiency. "Very courteous," Dan remarked to Allison as they headed toward the open door of the library. "Of course," Allison replied. "It's part of our tradition. Manners and politeness are always a priority at our gatherings." They passed through a lounge area, dimly lit, where a couple sat whispering to each other on a couch. Then they entered a large room, almost like a party hall. There were several seating areas, a small bar in the corner, a dance floor, and plenty of couches. The space was decorated with live trees and pots and candles. On one side of the room, French doors led to an open terrace with a lit pool. There were about 20 people in the room, mostly gathered in small groups. Anna immediately spotted a familiar face. "Anna, this is Jessica," Allison said. "Jessica, hi, Anna." The women hugged. "I'm so glad you came, and you too, Dan," Jessica added with a smile. "Where's Timothy?" Dan asked, hoping to see someone he knew. "He's on the terrace in the circle," Jessica replied. "You mean the circle?" Anna asked, squinting slightly. "Exactly. Hold on. I'll introduce you." Jessica left, and Dan placed a hand on Anna's shoulder. She shrugged it off gently, as if her mind was elsewhere. When Jessica returned with a young man in his 20s, Anna quietly whispered to Dan, "Wow." "Anna," Jessica said enthusiastically, "this is Trevor Hunter. Trevor is a good friend of mine." "Anna," Trevor said approvingly, looking her up and down. The tension between them was palpable, growing with every second. "And this is Dan," Jessica added. Dan shook Trevor's hand, who gripped it harder than necessary, clearly trying to assert his dominance. It annoyed Dan, but he chose not to escalate. "Anna, come with me. I want to introduce you to someone," Jessica said. When Anna followed Jessica and Trevor, Dan attempted to follow, but Jessica stopped him. "Dan, be smart and wait here. You'll see her again soon," she said, leaving him by the bar. Jessica led Anna to a group of people standing in the corner, chatting. Anna expected to join the conversation, but instead, Jessica approached a tall black man, tapped him on the shoulder, and caught his attention. When he turned around, Anna saw an incredibly handsome man in his 30s with an athletic build. His intense gaze made her blush. "Trevor, this is Anna, the one I told you about," Jessica said. "Anna," Trevor said, taking her hand and squeezing it firmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you. You'll be in good hands." "Nice to meet you, Trevor," Anna replied, feeling her body warm with excitement. She tried to hide her blush. "You'll be in good hands," Jessica confirmed, as she left them alone. Trevor led Anna to a love seat and sat down next to her. Anna felt his warmth pressing against her legs and took a sip of champagne. "Where's your husband?" he asked. "He's sitting by the door," Watching us, Anna replied. I see. Dan can't take his eyes off us. Why don't we give him something to think about? Trevor said with a light smile, placing his hand on the back of the couch behind Anna and gently touching her shoulder. Anna shivered, but didn't push him away. She crossed her legs and turned slightly toward him, realizing she was sinking into this new world. I think we'll get along just fine, Trevor said, continuing to caress her shoulder. Anna took another sip of champagne, becoming more aware that this evening could change everything. Trevor laid his hand on the back of the couch behind Anna and softly placed his other hand on her shoulder. His touch made her flinch slightly, but she didn't move away. Instead, she crossed her legs and turned slightly toward him. I think we'll get along just fine, Trevor said with a smile, gently stroking her shoulder. Anna took another sip of champagne. Dan was uneasy. Things were happening too quickly. He decided that if Anna was going to get close to a stranger this fast, he should do the same. Dan headed back to the bar to cool down. Dan surveyed the room, but something felt off. Trevor glanced at Anna and said, I've heard your husband might not fully understand the rules of this house, right? Yes, it might be a shock for him, Anna responded with a smile. Well, I think you'll fit right in here, Anna. And I'm sure by the end of the night, you'll be glad you came, Trevor continued. You think so? She asked, flirting slightly, getting into the mood of the evening. Oh yes, especially when we get your husband involved. We'll have to put a collar on him outside until he figures things out. I'm sure by the end of the night, you'll be the happiest woman here. I just want to make sure you'll come back. He slowly moved his face closer to hers. She knew he was going to kiss her. It seemed like an eternity before his lips touched hers, and a flurry of thoughts raced through her mind. How would Dan react? How would she react? Was this really happening? Did she want it? She answered that last question with a firm yes. His lips met hers, and despite the room full of people, she didn't care. His gentle kiss only confirmed her decision. When she felt his tongue softly probing her lips, she immediately opened up to meet him. She quietly moaned as she began to fully engage in the kiss, pressing her lips against his. There was no turning back, she realized, as her body began to react. She knew she was going to give herself to this man. When the kiss ended, Anna was almost breathless from the rush of emotions running through her body. If he's as good at everything else as he is at kissing, she thought, then I'm definitely in trouble. I think it's time to introduce you to what this club is really about, don't you think? Trevor asked. What do you mean? I mean, you should put this collar on your husband and send him to sit in the circle. Anna stood up and found Dan at the bar. Hey, honey, she said. Are you having fun? Am I having fun? Well, I guess, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Don't be like that. We agreed to try this. I hope you don't mind if Anna reached into her pocket and pulled out the collar, moving to place it around Dan's neck. Honey, is this necessary? He asked, flinching slightly. Sure, turn around so I can fasten it. He did as she asked and heard the small lock click into place. The sensation of the collar around his neck snapped him out of the dreamlike state he had been in. Suddenly, everything felt wrong. Looking more closely, Dan realized there were indeed more men than women in the room, and many of them were young and fit. However, there didn't seem to be many single women among them. Another strange discovery was that only men were sitting in the circle outside, while their wives and young men were heading upstairs. Damn, he muttered. They're playing me. We're leaving. No, Anna replied. We just got here, and I want to spend more time with Trevor. You knew from the start what this place was. How long have you and Jessica been planning to trick me into coming here? Just close your eyes. You just need to get used to the idea, Anna added. I won't get used to this. You will. Timothy and Bill did. We've both slept with other people. This is no different. This is completely different. This involves humiliation and disrespect, and you've already been scheming behind my back. I don't know what Timothy and Bill think, but I'm not them. You know I wouldn't have agreed to this if I had known earlier. The parties are meant for married women. It's great that Timothy and Bill support Jessica and Sarah. That's true devotion and confidence. It seems to me that these parties are more about guys using married women for their own pleasure. If you really loved me, you'd let me do this, and we could continue our happy, supportive relationship. Anna smiled triumphantly as Dan lowered his eyes after what felt like an eternal pause. That's the problem. I love you and thought you loved me, he said. I'm leaving. As Dan headed for the door, Trevor approached him. Where do you think you're going? You can't leave without my permission. Dan didn't answer. You need to stay and see a real man make love to your wife. Trust me, once you see it, you'll realize you can't compete with him. We'll break the rules and let you watch the first time. Dan looked at Anna, waiting for her to change her mind, to object, anything, but nothing came. He didn't like that Trevor took it for granted that he could outdo Dan with his own wife. He was irritated with himself, but most of all, he couldn't believe that Anna was going along with it and seemed to be enjoying it. Dan turned to Trevor. Are you going to try to stop me? It might not be as easy as you think. Don't worry, sometimes we get an initial reaction like this. He'll come around. Just leave him for a few hours to cool down. You can still get what you came for, and you can deal with him tomorrow. Come on upstairs. Anna hesitated, but then took his offered hand. A few minutes later, Anna stood in the center of the room, while her future lover, Trevor, sat in a chair, watching her. He always enjoyed the first time with a new woman, especially after a conflict with her husband. It made everything sweeter. He wondered if she would be scared when she saw him, if she would scream or cry. Either way, he was confident that she would become his follower, and he eagerly anticipated the moment. Anna, meanwhile, tried not to think about Dan, feeling the excitement of undressing in front of a stranger. She reached back and slowly pulled the zipper down on her dress. She desperately wanted to make an impression, though the argument with Dan still lingered in her mind. Despite that, she was certain she wanted to move forward. Shrugging her shoulders, she let the top of her dress fall to her waist, revealing a lavender bra that barely contained her chest. Oh, baby, you're making me very happy, Trevor said approvingly, watching her closely. I just know we're going to get along great. The thought crossed her mind that Dan had helped her choose this dress. But those thoughts quickly faded as Trevor continued, let's see the rest. With those words, she allowed the dress to fall to her feet. She kicked it aside, standing with her legs apart and her hands on her hips. Trevor noticed the matching garter belt, panties, and black stockings. Anna reached behind to undo her bra, letting it fall to the floor and cupped her breasts in her hands as if offering them up for Trevor's approval. Come closer and let me get a better look. Anna stepped closer to Trevor, standing between his parted legs. Sensations overwhelmed her, and she realized this was just the beginning. She placed her hands on his head and pulled him toward her, but intrusive images of Dan kept flashing through her mind, preventing her from fully focusing. Trevor lowered Anna to her knees. She could no longer pretend that she felt as comfortable as before. Trevor smiled and began unzipping his pants. I think you'll find this worth your while, he said with a seductive smile. Go ahead, he softly said. Receive my gift for you. Anna slowly reached out toward him through the opening of his pants. Oh my God, she murmured. Come on, baby. Don't make me wait, Trevor urged. This was everything she had dreamed of in that moment. She tried to imagine what this would mean for her and her marriage. Don't stop, Trevor said. Trevor touched her head, signaling that it was time to move forward. He knew exactly what this attractive married woman needed, and he was going to make sure she experienced it fully. They both stood up and removed the rest of their clothes. They kissed while standing by the bed, but the kiss was purely physical, devoid of any tenderness. Then, they moved onto the bed. Please, be gentle, Anna whispered. But Trevor had no intention of being gentle. It hurt, a lot. She likely deserved it, treating Dan the way she had. But she pushed those thoughts away once again. Anna was completely consumed by her desire and the new sensations she was feeling for the first time in her life, even in such circumstances. She felt a pang of guilt toward her husband, but the feeling passed quickly. Finally, they both relaxed in each other's arms. But something still felt wrong, and the image of Dan suddenly overwhelmed her so intensely that she began to panic. Anna stood up and started getting dressed. Trevor, watching her, suggested they go for another round. Anna didn't like how he phrased it. It felt cheap and dismissive. She quickly dressed and made her way back to Dan. She felt extremely embarrassed. The sex had been good, but more painful than she expected. It wasn't as great as her friends had made it sound. Maybe she just needed to get used to the physical differences of these kinds of guys. Dan had ruined everything. If he hadn't left, she wouldn't have kept thinking about him. She hadn't expected to think of him at all. This was supposed to be her night. 2 weeks from now, you and Dan will come to the next party, Trevor said. I hope so. And if you have any issues with him, contact me. I can come to your place, show him the new situation, and help him understand the inevitable. After leaving the Banana Club party, Dan sat behind the wheel of his car, deep in thought. The party, which he had reluctantly attended for Anna's sake, had turned into a devastating blow. The humiliation, the sense of betrayal, and, above all, the realization that his marriage was crumbling right before his eyes gnawed at him. Contrary to his usual habit, he didn't head home. Home no longer felt like a safe place. It now represented betrayal. Dan decided that he needed time to figure things out. He drove toward the mountains, a place where he always found peace. It was his sanctuary, and it was there that he hoped to clear his mind and decide what to do next. Anna woke up the next morning in an empty house and immediately knew something was wrong. Unlike previous arguments, when Dan always returned, this time his absence felt different. The house was filled with a silence that pressed down on her, and the lack of his usual presence unnerved her. Panic began to set in as she realized that her actions at the party might have truly damaged their relationship. This wasn't just a temporary rift, as she had hoped, but a real separation. Jessica Clark and Allison Reed tried to comfort her. They assured Anna that this was just a crisis and that if she gave Dan time, he would return. Jessica insisted that men often overreact emotionally and that everything would smooth over with patience. Allison, being more analytical, advised Anna that Dan would come back if she remained persistent. But despite their words, Anna was beginning to understand that she had gone too far. Her craving for adventure and excitement, which once seemed so harmless, had now destroyed their marriage. Meanwhile, Dan, secluded in the mountains, reflected on his relationship with Anna. He realized that the trust they had built over the years had been shattered. Her actions at the party showed him how deeply damaged their connection had become. It was hard for him to imagine that they could ever rebuild what they once had. Every moment of that night, every gesture from Anna, every look she gave to other men seemed to have burned their past to ashes. Dan was beginning to see that their relationship might be beyond saving. After spending a few days in the mountains, Dan started to realize that he needed to drastically change his life. Returning to the city, he felt that he couldn't continue living the way he had before. His job as a financial analyst, which had once made him proud, no longer brought him joy or satisfaction. It had become empty and devoid of meaning. His entire former world seemed faded. Dan decided it was time to act. He quit his job, leaving behind the routine and burden of his former position, and turned to something that had always drawn him, nature and tourism. He became a freelancer, organizing hikes and trips for people who, like him, sought solace and peace away from the bustle of the city. During one of his tours, Dan met Carol Martin, the owner of a tourist business. She was not only a professional in her field, but also someone who shared his views on life and nature. Carol became the support he needed during this difficult period. Slowly, their professional relationship blossomed into something more. In her presence, Dan began to feel a true joy that had been missing from his marriage for a long time. Meanwhile, Anna made attempts to win Dan back. She sent him messages, called, and tried to meet with him, but it was all in vain. Dan was no longer the man who was willing to forgive. He had realized that his new life with Carol brought him more happiness than his relationship with Anna ever could. He no longer wanted to go back to the past. His future was now intertwined with nature, freelancing, and the new woman in his life who gave him peace and happiness. Months later, Dan found his inner balance and began building his new life with Carol. Now, he enjoyed each day, spending time in nature, doing what he loved, and developing his new tourism business. With Carol by his side, he felt support, understanding, and true joy, things he hadn't felt in years during his marriage to Anna. Dan realized that his relationship with Anna had deteriorated not just because of the Banana Club and her thirst for adventure, but also because of the gradual loss of mutual respect and trust. Their bond had been doomed because they had stopped understanding each other and had forgotten what it meant to be partners in life. Each of them had become focused on their own desires, forgetting what it meant to be a team. Anna, now alone, was consumed with regret. Her experiments and her desire for thrills, which had once seemed so important to her, had led to the collapse of her marriage. The Banana Club, which she had seen as a symbol of freedom and new experiences, had instead become the symbol of her family's destruction. She realized too late the gravity of her mistakes. Dan was gone, and now the place beside her was empty. Dan, on the other hand, had decided to move forward without looking back. He was now free from the past, from the hurt and disappointments. His new life with Carol had become the start of something greater, a life where he had found his purpose and inner peace.